Mrs. Morris and the Ghost. Chapter 4. Exhausted by the energy expended to hold a masculine form, to dress, to speak, to be seen by the beautiful Charlene, Jack's essence soared above the widow's walk. He'd loved this place alive, and he loved it dead. He could see far out to the wharf from his house on the hilltop, see the lawn that Will cared for so meticulously. But he couldn't leave. Trapped. He dove into the wind, flying faster and faster around the property, just to feel something in this place of shadow. Jack pushed away negative thoughts of his wife and her possible infidelity, knowing it was too late to do anything about it now. Could he have loved her more? Worked less? What had been his crime that drove her to another man's arms? Jack ruthlessly put Shauna aside, thinking instead of Charlene as he hovered above the large oak tree. She'd seen him, talked to him, believed in him, and that was a celebration after years of isolation. He was sorry for scaring her, but she'd been so brave, fighting her fears to give him a fair shake. Wide hazel eyes, a pink mouth, long rich brown hair, a pretty woman for sure, and she'd agreed to help him. His heart full, Jack manifested himself on the emerald green lawn beneath the tree and did a fancy little two-step. Not quite Fred Astaire, but as a ghost, Jack could dance like the wind, with nobody watching. He tried it again, imagining Charlene in his arms as he lowered her for a dip. Not bad! Tilting his head back, Jack laughed deep from his belly. Not a whisper of sound was heard, but the air was brisk, the sky a brilliant blue, and he smelled the scent of the sea. All of his senses were aroused. Matter of fact, he couldn't recall feeling this alive since he discovered he was dead. Dead. Back to that again. It got old quickly. The wind in his sails suddenly deflated, and he sat on the ground near the back porch, cross-legged in the grass. Pretty Charlene had bought his home and was going to help him solve his murder, if that's in fact what had happened. After all this time, it was the only reason he could imagine for not going to the light. He hadn't realized the extent of his loneliness until talking with Charlene. A flash of silver gray fur flashed beneath the flowering bushes near the back porch. A squirrel? Hedgehog? Or worse, raccoons. They can make a real mess on a property. Jack searched under the purple rhododendron as a sad meow filtered upward from the plant next to him. Was that a cat? Stuck, maybe, in the brush? He heard the mewing again. He and Shauna hadn't had pets because she was allergic. Okay, kitty, come out to play. He peeked through the purple flowers and saw two yellow eyes staring back at him. Jack waved his hand in front of the cat's flat face. Do you see me? The cat hissed, arched his back, and then lunged towards Jack from the bushes to the porch stairs. Caught unaware, Jack toppled over, the silver Persian peering down on him from the step. The cat's eyes were like two yellowish orbs, the body beneath the long fur tense, ready to spring into attack if Jack moved a muscle. Whoa there! Nothing to be afraid of. You can see me, can't you? In all of his years trapped at the mansion, he'd been unable to communicate with anybody or anything. Had Charlene's presence somehow unlocked a psychic door? The cat's mouth peeled back in a meow, showing off sharp white teeth as he wriggled his whiskers. The furball then leaped from the step onto Jack's chest, but fell through. Meow, meow. His rough tongue flicked out and he attempted to lick Jack's face, but it wasn't there. Nice kitty. Jack's form evaporated beneath the cat, and the Persian didn't know what to make of it. He twirled and yowled, then lashed out with his claws, but couldn't connect with the man before him. The Persian managed a frustrated scowl, and Jack laughed. How strange that after a few long and lonely years, without making any kind of contact, he now had a woman and a cat who knew he existed. It was a refreshing change in his strange universe of nothingness. So, kitty cat, do you belong to Charlene? He didn't think she would leave a pet outside. He didn't recall seeing cat food or a crate in the house or around the grounds. The cat meowed again, as if trying to tell him something. beautiful fur, and a studded red collar with no tag. Are you lost? Hungry? Big yellow eyes widened and his whiskers twitched. He cocked his ears and tilted his head as if studying Jack. Well, if you're hungry, maybe Charlene will give you some milk. Like the Pied Piper, Jack headed around the side of the house to the front porch, and the cat trailed behind. Jack swooshed through the door and looked back to see if the cat followed. But no, the Persian remained on the other side. Jack floated through the oak, concentrated energy on scooping up the cat with the intention of taking him inside. But the cat's body smacked against the wooden panel, unable to materialize like Jack. The animal hissed in surprise. He dropped the angry cat onto an Adirondack chair and re-entered to find Charlene putting some china dishes in an ornate glass cabinet, her laptop open on the coffee table in the living room. "Charlene!" he called out. His voice skipped a little, and he realized that his power was not unlimited. She gasped in surprise, then whirled, and the flowered teapot slipped from her hands and splintered into tiny pieces. "Jack!" she exclaimed. "You can't go around sneaking up on me!" Charlene bent to gather the pieces, and he enjoyed the curve of her jeans from the rear. She must have changed while he'd been outside, contemplating his wife's betrayal. He'd had his pick of ladies, once upon a time, before he'd married Shauna and settled down. "I'm sorry, but can you come outside with me?" The hungry meow of the Persian stayed with him, and he hoped Charlene wouldn't chase the cat away. "What is it?" She sighed and set the pieces on the table next to her laptop. "You can see I'm busy. I have news too, about..." He darted to the front door and gave her an expectant smile. "Do you like cats?" "Not particularly." She twisted her hair into a bun at her nape, stabbing it in place with a pin. "Never had one. Never wanted one." "Well, this is a very special cat," he told her. "He, or she, I'm not sure which, can see me." "Are you sure? It's not a ghost too, I hope." She wiped her hands on her jeans and opened the door. The fluffy Persian sat on the doormat as though an invited guest. The cat put its tail in the air, its nose held high, and walked right past her to the kitchen. "Well, hello, little fuzzball." Charlene trailed after the cat with a bemused smile as it jumped onto the kitchen chair, preening in the sunshine that shone through the window above the sink. "What are you doing here?" She looked at the garden wall, squinting as if to catch sight of a home, although there was nothing around this property for a half-mile in either direction. "Where do you live? We don't have many neighbors close to us." Us. Jack felt his spirits lift. She had included him. "Well, he's certainly making himself at home." The cat had gracefully leapt down from the chair to twine around Charlene's ankles. "I think you might be hungry," Jack offered, nodding toward the fridge. "Some milk, perhaps?" She nibbled her lower lip in thought, but then relaxed. "Okay, a little milk, then I'll send him on his way. He has a collar, which means he belongs to somebody. Hopefully that somebody is looking for him right now." She bent down to scratch behind the cat's ears. "There are only a few homes on this street. That's one of the reasons I bought the place. Shauna and I enjoyed hosting parties. She was a member of the Ladies of Salem. Snooty bunch of women who primarily cared about how far a person's roots extended into Salem soil. He was sixth generation, but there were others who went back further. It had mattered to Shauna to belong. I found an old photograph of one of your parties online when I did the Google search for your name. You were such a handsome couple. I noticed the Steinway in the living room. Did you play?" Charlene poured milk into a bowl for the cat, who immediately lapped it up, full tail snaking in the air as he ate. Charlene glanced at Jack with empathy in her hazel eyes. "A little." Dyslexia had made it hard to read the music. But Shauna really mastered the piano. She was always intent on bettering herself. Piano, art classes, opening a gallery in town. You must have been proud of her. I was, for the first few years. Jack tried to drudge up the past, but his mind was filled with black holes. Then something happened, and we drifted apart. My memory isn't what it used to be, and I can't remember why we were unhappy at the end, or how and when I died. It's very frustrating. He tapped the place where his temple would be. She removed the empty bowl from the floor and tried to scoot the cat toward the back door. Instead, the cat took off up the central grand staircase, then turned, plopped his fat behind down on the first landing, and studied them with his golden eyes. "He's very beautiful," she said. "Somebody will be missing him." "Here, kitty." She snapped her fingers. "Come on down now. We have to take you home." The cat ignored her, then slowly turned and walked up the second flight of stairs. "I don't think he wants to go," Jack said, lips twitching in a smile as he thought of something that might convince Charlene to let the furball hang around. "Maybe he'll catch that mouse I saw earlier." "You saw a mouse?" Charlene slapped her hand on her chest. "Where? How big was it?" "Medium size. They've lived here for the last year, ever since that messy family moved out." He chuckled. "I thought you said nobody stayed." "It took me a full week to convince this brood to leave," Jack sat in the kitchen chair, folding one leg over the other. "At first I did the usual things. You know, opening doors that were shut, flickering the lights, the TV off and on, like I did with you. Boring stuff." He shrugged, remembering how oblivious the family had been. The kids stuffing their faces while playing video games. The parents too busy to care that the kids were messy. "Get to the point, Jack." Charlene's chestnut brown hair had come loose from its bun and now settled on her stiff shoulders as she tapped her toes. "I have a busy day ahead, and that includes finding out what happened to you. How did you get them to finally leave?" "I decided to be a little more creative and played music in the middle of the night. Phantom of the Opera was my personal favorite. So haunting and dramatic." His full mouth curved into a smug smile. "I started playing the piano right in front of their eyes. They could see the keys moving, but not me sitting on the piano bench." "That would be terrifying." "I would take things off their kitchen table, like the candles or napkins, and raise them mysteriously in the air. That freaked them out." "I'm surprised they lasted a week." "The father was a bully who was unkind to his chubby wife. After shouting came his fists, and that was when Jack had really lost his temper, trapping the jerk between the wall and the Steinway. They were gone the next day. I was glad to see them go." "Jack, is that a sweet side? I bet you were a wonderful doctor and a very caring husband." Charlene rinsed the milk dish and put it in the dishwasher. "I would like to think I was, and yet I have this niggling feeling that perhaps I wasn't as wonderful as I should have been." Was that the reason he hadn't passed? Had he been an egomaniac with too much money and not enough love for his fellow man? Jack scowled down at the floor, his form shimmering, as he doubted his past. Charlene walked over to him and lifted a hand as if she intended to pat his shoulder, then dropped her arm. She sat down near him, giving him a long and compassionate look. "We all have regrets, Jack. It might be nice not to remember them." But he had a feeling that without remembering, he'd be trapped here forever. "What brought you here, Charlene? What regrets do you have?" She opened her mouth and then closed it again, as if deciding what to share. Finally, she answered, "Only one. My husband and I tried for years to start a family, and month after month, year after year, well, it just broke our hearts. I had 2 miscarriages in the early stages. Eventually, it became too much. So we put the idea of raising a family behind us and became dedicated to our jobs, more attentive to each other." "I'm sorry for your heartache." "Thank you." She lifted her chin, her hazel eyes filled with unshed tears that she quickly blinked away. "We had a wonderful marriage. Jared was my best friend, my everything. But now I look back and wish we had adopted. We discussed it. But I was in my mid-30s by then and had just gotten a promotion. The time was never quite right." "I'm truly sorry. It must have been a painful ordeal. My wife didn't want kids." He'd assumed Shauna would come around, but her vacillation on the matter had been a sore point in their marriage. He shook his head. "My mistake. I would have loved a few children playing in these gardens. And Jonathan Strathmore V. She smiled. This place was definitely built for a large family. What made you buy it? Did you enjoy gardening? Or was it the ability to have parties? Shauna fell in love with it at first sight. She wanted something grand. Poor thing didn't have much of a childhood. Her parents died when she was young, and she grew up in foster care. As a preteen, it was impossible to place her in a real home. He rose from his chair and began to pace. As always, thoughts of Shauna disturbed him, made him feel guilty and uncertain. Yet she'd been the one to cheat. Surely he hadn't done anything to deserve that. He prided himself on being a gentleman. That must have been extremely difficult for her. The system can be brutal for a child, and a pretty teenager might have had all kinds of unwanted problems. She gave him another look of deep concern. Did she seem troubled to you? Could she have been the one to take your life? Surely not! Jack sank back down into the kitchen chair and put his head in his hands before looking at Charlene. Shauna? Want him dead? She had scholarships for Harvard, which is where I met her, though she transferred after that first year to pursue her art instead of medicine. She had gorgeous blonde hair down her hips and a laugh that could be heard for miles. Like a shiny star, she captured my attention. She'd had a wild edge, unlike the girls Jack had grown up with in Salem. You must have loved her very much. I did, but then something changed. He rubbed absently at the crease between his brow, which of course was no longer there. I wish I could remember. I have a feeling that it didn't end well with us. Maybe it was the baby thing. Maybe something else, like Theo. Or he couldn't recall. His form became opaque, and he could see through his hand to the kitchen table. Jack, I looked online, and nothing seemed unusual about your death. You fell down the stairs after having a stroke. She pointed to the grand staircase, where the cat now stared at them from the bottom step, tail swishing as if daring them to try to catch him. Did they do an autopsy? I was murdered, and someone wanted it covered up. I don't know if they did or not, but I'll find out. She brought her pencil to her lower lip. First, we need to see if you were murdered, and if so, then find your murderer so you can move on. And I can too. She stood. Can't have a ghost around when I open the classiest bed and breakfast in Salem, now can I? Jack didn't like being dismissed, and the idea of being away from Charlene, now that he'd found her, rankled him. Sure you can. I'd be a big hit. A real ghost. Lots of places boast they are haunted, but how many actually are? No, thank you. You promised. I did, and I will keep my word. He jammed his hands in his pockets and gazed out at the lawn. Would his freedom mean heaven? Had he earned the right to be there? Is that what was coming next, if they discovered what was keeping him here? Jack turned to face Charlene and shrugged off his doubts. I hope you're not getting tired of me already? He gave her a playful smile. Usually it takes a little longer for a woman to lose interest. No, it's not that. She jumped as the cat snuck between her legs. Holy cat! It's the cat. The Persian had stalked toward them unnoticed and now wrapped himself around Charlene's ankles with a loud purr. Between you and this furball here, I might have my own stroke. We should give it a name, he said, fingers out as he beckoned the cat to him. The cat hissed. How about Whiskey? Whiskers is a better name for a cat, but he doesn't belong here, and so we aren't naming him. She stepped away from the cat, who sat at her feet and meowed. Charlene frowned, then sighed and opened the cupboard to pull out a can of tuna. He's hungry and very demanding. Just one meal, but that's it. Is there an animal shelter in Salem? We must have one, Jack shrugged, feeling his energy wane. It required a lot to keep his form, and suddenly he was exhausted. I'll walk into town and ask around. It is such a gorgeous day that I don't want to be cooped up inside. Jack heard her, but he couldn't stay present anymore. Wish I could come too, he thought. knowing that for a short time he'd felt, well, almost normal. But being a ghost was a life sentence. He hoped when he passed over that he'd become whole again, one way or the other.